This is the fourth session in the series on the Four Noble Truths. Just as a quick review, the first session was an overview of the Four Noble Truths. And the last two sessions, we've focused in detail on the first Noble Truth. And that's what's normally translated as the truth of suffering. Here we are today on the second Noble Truth, which is what causes us to suffer. If you recall, in the first Noble Truth, the word that's translated as suffering is dukkha, and that it has a broad meaning, much more than just suffering. The etymology of the word is that it's a cart, and where the axle goes into the wheel is loose and bumpy, and so you get a bumpy ride is the idea. So the broader meaning of dukkha is really that life is unreliable, uncontrollable, uncertain. You could say unsatisfactory. It's satisfactory in the moment sometimes, but it doesn't last because things are changing. Life has its ups and downs. One way we said you could think of it is life's a bumpy ride. And we all know sometimes we get what we want, sometimes we don't get what we want, sometimes we get what we don't want. So this is the idea of dukkha. And then the first Noble Truth, the Four Noble Truths in general are really concerned with the aspect of dukkha that's the suffering part in particular. And so the first Noble Truth says we suffer when we cling, right? When we're not able to find a harmonious way of being or letting things be. We get in a reactive, constricted stance with things, right? And so that was the first Noble Truth, that suffering because we cling to things. Clinging is when we can't clinging means we want to kind of hold on to things, but it's actually not able to find a way of letting go when it's not just pleasant but unpleasant. So that was the first Noble Truth. The second Noble Truth is that there what is it that causes us to suffer? And it's conceptually very simple. The second Noble Truth says, what causes the clinging is, and the word in Pali is tanha, which literally means thirst. It's craving. When sometimes the second Noble Truth, people think that Buddhism is teaching that we're supposed to get rid of desires, that desires are wrong or bad. We're supposed to be just free of all desires. I hope we can see that that's actually not accurate. I think we need what we would call wholesome desire, wise desire. If you didn't desire or want to meditate, you wouldn't do it. If you didn't want to act in accordance with your own higher good intentions and aspirations and motivations, and be driven less by the unwholesome forces in us, you wouldn't do it. So of course desire is not what's being talked about here. It's when it gets so strong, again that word thirst, generally translated as craving, it gets so strong that it causes clinging. And we all know that things can get, either by the quality of what's happening or the strength of what's happening, it's hard to let go and let be, right? If there's really strong anger, that's going to really, or strong craving for something, strong any emotions, moods, thoughts, body sensations, these things can make it challenging. So it's not a judgment that we're doing something wrong. Next time, the next session will focus on the third Noble Truth, which is there is an end of suffering by putting an end to craving. That's basically that's a preview, but that is the third Noble Truth. And in that session, we'll actually talk about, well, how can we work with what's going on to find a way? What are the ways that can actually really help us if we're using this model? Lots of models to work with in the Buddhist tradition. The Four Noble Truths, generally considered one of the most, or maybe one of the most, or the most fundamental or foundational of the teachings. If we're going to use this model, we can put it into practice, as we'll see next time, and use it to actually, in a concrete way, help us learn to bring it down, to let go. But for right now, on the second Noble Truth, we're just hanging out right here with just noticing what's happening. So I want to come back to that in a few moments, but first I want to pause and say just a little bit about mindfulness. So mindfulness is defined in lots of different ways. One of the definitions I've heard is mindfulness defined as paying attention to whatever it is, to something very specific or particular in a very specific way, right? Putting our attention on some experience. I would say that's the practice of mindfulness. The actual experience of being mindful is, my definition is, it's just simply not being on automatic pilot. Some people say when we lose our mindfulness and we're lost and caught up in things, people say, oh, that person went unconscious. And we know what they mean, and that's a fine way to say it, but you're not actually unconscious. You're conscious, but you're just lost and caught up in things. That's what I mean by being on automatic pilot. Just to use an example, we could pick anything. Let's just say some strong anger arises. We've all had the experience where we're having the experience, we're conscious, but we're just, I call it being entangled. We're just caught up in it, right? And it's real different experience if we're fortunate enough to then kind of, if we say, wake up out of it and just know, oh, I'm angry. The mindfulness is there. You still feel everything. It sometimes, as we'll see next session on the Third Noble Truth, sometimes just shining the light of awareness on something is enough, and it kind of lets go. We see what's happening and we can let go. But oftentimes it's not enough, and we need a lot more tools in our toolkit. But we can see that just knowing what's happening for now, just to be aware, it's qualitatively very, very different. That's the idea of the quality of mindfulness. And we need this to help us, right? Because if we're caught up and lost in things, let me just give you another example. For those of you who are meditators and have heard, very commonly the way meditation instructions are given is, let's just pick any practice, say mindfulness of breathing. I should say there's many, many ways to meditate. Breath meditation is one out of many. It's not better than anything else. The important thing is to find the practice that works best for each of us. They're all equal once we have the right practice. That's another discussion, but I just want to mention that for now. Say we'll just pick mindfulness of breathing, and the instruction is connect with your breathing, put your attention on your breathing, and we know the mind is going to wander away, and the instruction is often given when your mind has wandered away, you just come back. Every time the mind wanders away, don't create a problem, don't beat yourself up. That's just more spinning out. You just come back and start again. Even if you're lost in thinking or planning or daydreaming most of the time, just by coming back to the breath when you do remember is fully enough, and it will grow and deepen on its own. So that's the instruction that's often given. That instruction's actually not exactly right. It turns out when you're gone and lost, there is no instruction. You don't even know you're gone, right? The instruction doesn't kick in until you kind of wake up and realize, oh, I've been gone. You're not caught up in the daydream anymore, and you're already back. Then the instruction is just reconnect, don't create a problem or beat yourself up or do anything like that and come back, but you're already back. Similarly, working with the Four Noble Truths or any of the other Dharma models that are out there, it depends upon mindfulness. If you're not present, you don't have any freedom or choice. When we know what's happening, depending on what's going on, either the quality or the strength of it, it may be such that even the mindfulness isn't enough to really have a choice point. Again, more about that in the next session on the Third Noble Truth. But that's the starting point. So we need to have this quality, and connected closely with mindfulness is this idea of what we call clear knowing. And so we're mindful and we're awake and present, and then we're able to perceive things more clearly. So we need that to help us. And I do want to just mention one other quality that's so important, which is the word that's often translated as concentration. The word in Pali and in Sanskrit is samadhi. And the real meaning of it is to have a mind that's undistracted. Another way to think of it, it's a steadiness of mind. That really supports the presence, Rather than our mind jumping around and scattered all over the place, the mind becomes more steady and present and still. So really, really can be present, and that magnifies the power of the mindfulness. So this undistracted or steadiness, and that's a big, big topic here at Metta Dharma. We've got other talks you can look up on our website on this very important topic of samadhi. But for here, we just name that's what it is, a steadiness, undistractedness. And so these two come together with the mindfulness and the steadiness come together, and the clear awareness is part of that. To really help us, so any of you who are experienced meditators know that these qualities strengthen doing the formal practices. And that's the ability, we become naturally lost and caught or on automatic pilot less and less. And the steadiness comes in there more and more, our presence and knowing what's happening. So not only are we lost less of the time, but we also, when we are present, we have these other supports of a strengthened mindfulness, a strengthened steadiness to really let us connect with and meet what's going on. So I just want to name those as part of, and we work the best with what we have. So you may not be a formal meditator. I encourage you, if you're drawn to it, to find ways the best you can. Sometimes it's hard in daily life to, our lives are busy and it can be hard to find the time. We do the best we can. Sometimes people choose to go on retreats, and that can be supportive. But doing the best you can with the mind that you have, and the amount of time you can remember. For now, we want to just bring the mindfulness to notice what's happening, right? Again, next time, then we'll bring in some really tools. Once we notice what's happening, how do we work with it? For now, the first noble truth, we just know when you're suffering, let that teach you, right? Right there is a big shift. What is so typical for all of us at some time, it's happened for me, of course, many, many times, is some kind of suffering comes up and there's an instant reactivity, right? Mindfulness kind of gets a wedge in between what happens and how we respond to what happens. And so the mindfulness is so important. So we bring the mindfulness the best we can, and we just notice. Rather than automatically fall into reactivity, the next time there's difficulty or suffering, if you can remember, let it teach you. The present moment is teaching you. It's saying, hey, take a look at this. There's some suffering. And if we can remember, we can just be aware of what's happening. That's the starting point. It's not necessarily the ending point. We need to work with it, find an end to the suffering. But for now, let's just start with what's real and true in the moment. There's suffering, right? And then we can start to notice another very, very important piece, which is not only what's happening in the present moment. Let me pause on the what's happening. I'll come to the next piece in just a moment. What's happening can be a lot of things. Maybe we just check into the physical body, something in there. Maybe there's some mood, emotion, thoughts. All of these can help us. And even with moods and emotions and thoughts, some people find just starting with feeling in the body can be like a doorway to really help connect and just stay. Oh, I've got tension in my belly or my neck's tight or whatever it is. And then we hang out with that. And then it's saying, oh, wait a minute, I've got something else going on. So that's a big topic. But we do whatever supports us to connect with what's happening. Then, when you can remember, there's a second piece that is very, very important to bring in, to notice not just what's happening, but how are you relating with what's happening? If there's not much going on, sometimes there's not much to see because you're not having any big reactivity in how you're relating to notice. But certainly in the times when whatever's going on is strong, we can notice that both pieces, what's happening in the body, anger, I'll just use anger as an example, fear, worry, whatever it is, frustration. How am I relating to it? If you pay attention to that, you may find just by noticing that, sometimes they'll just let go. But a lot of times you just notice there's some kind of reactivity. Like, I don't like it. It's hard just to let this be, right? It can be hard to let things be when they're terrible, when they're horrible, when it's really, really bad, right? when we're in clinging, that's what's happening. It's not a judgment. Again, we're just noticing that this is what happens. So then we're aware of what's happening, how I'm relating to it, which if there's clinging, then we can shift to the second noble truth, which is, again, we then notice what's causing, is there some craving in there, some tanha, thirst, which is basically a strong desire to either hold on to something that we're afraid we're going to lose, or that, get this away from me. This is painful. It's difficult to be with this. And we start to notice all that. That's where the first and second noble truths are really wanting us to do, is just to pay attention to that. So you have to be patient to the next session, so that the Four Noble Truths doesn't leave us stuck here. But we need to go through these stages to be aware, so we can work skillfully. For all of us who want to free ourselves from our suffering, it's important to understand our suffering, understand its cause, right? How do you understand or come to know something? It's through experience. So you don't have to purposely go looking for suffering to understand it. There are paths of practice, Dharma or Buddhist paths, that actually purposely look for difficulties or suffering in order to give you something to work with. For example, maybe with some teacher, they'll have people purposely sit a certain amount longer than you're comfortable, so that pain comes in the body, so that you can then turn towards it and work with it in the way we're talking about. That's fine if you want to practice in those traditions. I come from a different place. I don't recommend that people go looking for suffering, because there's no need. Isn't it true that suffering will find you? It will find all of us. You don't need to go looking. Just as being a human being, plenty of opportunities come for everyone when suffering is or difficulty is up, and then we can consciously use these tools to work with it. So in that way, we start, it's a big shift if we start to think of life as our teacher, right? And again, I recognize that can be difficult depending on what's going on. So we want to be respectful of our own experience, and especially if we're dealing with really challenging chronic situations where we can't see a way out, or and it really is too much. We want to be very respectful of that, and we do the best we can with that. But if things are within the range where we might have at least a chance to work with it, knowing what's happening, bringing our awareness there is the beginning, and it can be the whole practice, but certainly that's the starting point. So that's enough for now on the first and second noble truths. And again, don't stop here, because this sort of leaves you connecting with your suffering, but we want to come to the third noble truth about really how do we come to an end and find, it's a cliche when people use this term, inner peace.